The reading this morning is from Deuteronomy chapter 29, verses 2 to 28, and it's headed up Renewal of the Covenant. Moses summoned all the Israelites and said to them, "Your eyes have seen all that the Lord did in Egypt to Pharaoh, to all his officials, and to all his land. With your own eyes you saw those great trials, those signs and great wonders. But to this day, the Lord has not given you a mind that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear. Yet the Lord says, during the 40 years that I led you through the wilderness, your clothes did not wear out, nor did the sandals on your feet. You ate no bread and drank no wine or other fermented drink. I did this so that you might know that I am the Lord your God. When you reach this place, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, came out to fight against us, but we defeated them. We took their land and gave it as an inheritance to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Carefully follow the terms of this covenant so that you may prosper in everything you do. All of you are standing today in the presence of the Lord your God, your leaders and chief men, your elders and officials, and all the other men of Israel, together with your children and your wives, and the foreigners living in your camps, who chop your wood and carry your water. You are standing here in order to enter into a covenant with the Lord your God, a covenant the Lord is making with you this day and sealing with an oath, to confirm you this day as his people, that he may be your God as he promised you, and as he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am making this covenant with its oath, not only with you who are standing here with us today in the presence of the Lord our God, but also with those who are not here today. You yourselves know how we lived in Egypt and how we passed through the countries on the way here. You saw among them their detestable images and idols of wood and stone, of silver and gold. Make sure there is no man or woman, clan or tribe among you today whose heart turns away from the Lord our God to go and worship the gods of those nations. Make sure there is no root among you that produces such bitter poison. When such a person hears the words of this oath and they invoke a blessing on themselves, thinking, I'll be safe, even though I persist in going my own way, they will bring disaster on the watered land as well as the dry. The Lord will never be willing to forgive them. His wrath and zeal will burn against them. All the curses written in this book will fall on them, and the Lord will blot out their names from under heaven. The Lord will single them out from all the tribes of Israel for disaster, according to all the curses of the covenant written in this book of the law. Your children who follow you in later generations and foreigners who come from distant lands will see the calamities that have fallen on the land and the diseases with which the Lord has afflicted it. The whole land will be a burning waste of salt and sulphur, nothing planted, nothing sprouting, no vegetation growing on it. It will be like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in fierce anger. All the nations will ask, why has the Lord done this to this land? Why this fierce burning anger? And the answer will be, it is because this people abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the covenant he made with them when he brought them out of Egypt. They went off and worshipped other gods and bowed down to them, gods they did not know, gods he had not given them. Therefore, the Lord's anger burned against this land, so that he brought on it all the curses written in this book. In furious anger and in great wrath, the Lord uprooted them from their land and thrust them into another land, as it is now.
There we go. Let's get sorted first. So Leslie had the tough one, and I get to do the nice reading that comes at the end. We've got quite a long Bible reading today. I'm just going to continue where we left off. So Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 29, and through to chapter 30, verse 10. Do follow along with me on the screen or with a Bible or device in front of you. Let's continue that reading before we take a look at it. So Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 29. Let me say it's lovely to see so many people here that I do know, and some people who I think I sort of know, and then some people who I don't know at all. Isn't that lovely? But let's dive into this reading. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. When all these blessings and curses I've set before you come on you, and you take them to heart wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul according to everything I command you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you. Even if you have been banished to the most distant land under the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. He will bring you to the land that belonged to your ancestors, and you will take possession of it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live. The Lord your God will put all these curses on your enemies who hate and persecute you. You will again obey the Lord and follow all his commands I am giving you today. Then the Lord your God will make you most prosperous in all the work of your hands and in the fruit of your womb, the young of your livestock and the crops of your land. The Lord will again delight in you and make you prosperous, just as he delighted in your ancestors, if you obey the Lord your God and keep his commands and decrees that are written in this book of the law, and turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Well, it's January, and actually today, perhaps less than yesterday, but today and yesterday is actually an exception to the rule, to the norm, isn't it? It's January, and it's being cold and grey. As grey as this jumper, I reckon. Someone described this as white noise earlier. But it is, isn't it? Sort of visual white noise. But grey, and it's been gloomy, hasn't it? And foggy, and that kind of damp, that January cold, damp feel, hasn't it? That kind of thing. And it's been gloomy, but we got through Blue Monday. Right, that was Monday, wasn't it? Blue Monday. They did Yellow Sunday the day before to try and it was on the radio trying to counteract Blue Monday. We got through that. We got through Blue Monday, Yellow Sunday, and everyone's waiting for payday for sure. It's January. People in January review things, don't they? It's the beginning of a new year. We review stuff and we resolve stuff as well, don't we? New Year's resolutions. The gym memberships will go through the roof this month, won't they? And then that'll sort of tail off in a few months' time. But we review things. We resolve things. And we renew things as well. Maybe even this week you've opened an email and it says the phrase annual renewal in it. I've got to renew that again. Or not just that kind of formal sense, but it's the beginning of a new year. I think we'll renew some aspect of our lives, start again, have a fresh start kind of thing. Now this passage here, this whole passage is all about the renewal of relationship with the God who made us. That's what it's about. It's about renewing the relationship with our God. Maybe you're in a relationship with the God of the Bible right now. Well, if you are, then that relationship needs renewing. It needs a bit of work doing to it, like any relationship. Relationships need a bit of work, a bit of renewal now and again, and our relationship with God needs that from time to time. And maybe you're here today and you're not sure. I don't know what you're talking about, Rich. I don't know if I'm in a relationship with any God or the God of the Bible. Or maybe you're watching online and you think, no, I don't know if I'm there yet. Well, I'd encourage you to just watch, just look in and just tune in and just see what something of what this relationship with this great God looks like. He says to us in this passage today, as Tim has already alluded to, he says to us, come back. That's what he says to each one of us today. He says, come back to me today. Renew that relationship. So that's what we're going to think about this morning. 3 things. The first thing he says is come back today. Now, for us to understand this passage, to understand what God is saying to us, we have to wrestle with a little bit that word covenant. The word covenant, it appears in this part of Deuteronomy, in the surrounding chapters as well. And what's a covenant? It's a structured relationship. Put it like that. It's a structured relationship. Marriage is a covenant, isn't it? There's contract in there, but it's a covenant as well. And through the Bible, God makes covenants, these sort of structured relationships with his people. He makes a covenant through Adam right at the beginning of the Bible story, and another one through Noah. And then he makes a covenant through Abraham. And then he makes a covenant here in this part of the Bible through Moses with his people. And he makes a covenant through David, and then ultimately the new covenant through Jesus, these structured relationships. And the take-home message as you look at these covenants between God and his people is that God is a God of grace. God, he initiates the relationship. He gets it started. He kicks off the relationship. He enters into a covenant with these people. And the backdrop is always that God has done something for them. God saved them. God's intervened in their situation. And he's bringing them to be, as we saw last week, a special people. God instigates the relationship. He pursues the relationship. It's all about his great love and grace. And God also accommodates himself in this idea of covenant. He accommodates himself to us. Now, you hear that word covenant and you think, well, it sounds a bit foreign to me. It's not a word I use in everyday language. It's a bit Bible-y, isn't it? But actually, back there then, in the ancient Near Eastern world, there are covenants everywhere. Kings would make a covenant with their subjects, and it would just be, it's just a simple structure. Here's the name of the king, here's the kind of backstory, the relationship, here's the stipulations of the covenant, and then there's a list of blessings if you stick with that, and there's a list of curses if you turn away from the covenant that you've agreed to. That's what a covenant is. So God is talking in the language of the day to his people. They would have understood these ideas perhaps better than we do. And here God is renewing the covenant with his people. Last week we saw a Bible passage. We looked at it in a very particular way, but throughout it we saw that language of curse. That God has set up these curses. If people don't stay faithful to this covenant relationship with him, there are curses in response to that. That was chapter 27. And then in chapter 28, you see this wonderful list of blessings. Look, if you stick with this God, you go into the land and you just stick with the program, just stick with him, then there's all of these wonderful blessings. And then a great long list of curses for those who wander off. And you know, here's the thing. In that chapter, there are 14 verses of blessings, and then there are 53 verses of curses. There is an ominous sense in Deuteronomy that this relationship is going to go wrong. I've said this before, and no one corrected me, so I'm going to use this illustration again. There is in the Western world this understanding in music of the major and the minor key, right? No, none of the musicians corrected me, so I'm assuming it's all broadly right. I'm not a musician at all, as you know, and don't ever inflict me on yourselves. Somebody stop me if that happens, right? Singing, music, whatever it is. But I understand that the major key is more upbeat. It's more upbeat, it's more positive, it's more cheerful, if you like. And then the minor key in music is a bit more kind of sad, it could be melancholy, it can be ominous. What's coming? Films use this all the time, don't they? You know, what's going to happen now? And it sort of shapes your emotions, how you feel about things. And that's what's going on in Deuteronomy all the way through. Major key, the Lord your God is going to take you into the land. You're going into the land, it's going to be great. And then minor key, this could go wrong, don't blow it. There's an ominous sense that God's people will blow it here. And that's why he says, come back today. He knows what they're like, and so he says to them in this passage, come back to me today. Notice with me that Moses does something he's done before here. Just look with me at chapter 29. He goes at verse 2 back to their history, doesn't he? Summons all of them and he says, your eyes have seen all that the Lord did in Egypt to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to all his land. And he just lists it. With your own eyes you saw, it's history, right? It's past tense. You saw those great trials, those signs and those great wonders. It's what we've seen throughout this book, isn't it? Moses, he took us and he looked backwards. Look at what God's done. That's the setup. That's the backdrop for the relationship. Look at what God has done for you. Look at his grace towards you. And then he moves on and puts his finger on something else, and it's more inward, if you like. Very similar to what we've seen through this series. So verse 4, he says, but to this day, the Lord has not given you a mind that understands. Literally, that word there is a heart that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear. Moses just puts his finger on an inward problem for God's people, the problem of their hearts, what goes on within. The great command, right, of Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, that we are to love the Lord our God with all of our heart and with all of our soul and so on. That word heart appears in Deuteronomy 51 times. Moses is saying something. Moses is kind of getting our attention on this issue, isn't he? 51 times he uses the word heart. And sometimes he concentrates it. You know, like you go around an old granny's house maybe when you were younger, and they give you like concentrate squash, like 50% squash and 50% water, that'll put hairs on your chest, that kind of thing. Well, just a couple of times Moses goes granny on us and concentrates. So chapter 4, chapter 6, 4 times the word heart appears in both of those chapters. But then here in this chapter, 8 times. Double concentrate. He's really speaking to us here about our hearts. One of my old pastors used to say, so helpful, so true, he used to say, the heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. The heart of the human problem, all over, is the problem of the human heart. And that's what Moses picks up on here, their hearts. But who are we talking about? Who are these people? Well, look with me at verse 10, and let's see who these people are. All of you standing today in the presence of the Lord your God, your leaders and chief men, your elders and officials, all the other men of Israel, together with your children, your wives, and the foreigners living in your camps who chop your wood and carry your water, you're standing here in order to enter into this covenant today. Those are the people that are here. Now, just note with me in passing that there are foreigners amongst God's people who are brought into the covenant community here. Let's never underestimate the presence of all kinds of foreign people within God's people, even here in the history of the Bible. God is not racist, but he is gracist. Sorry, that's a bit cheesy, isn't it? But you see what I'm saying? He's not racist, but he is gracist. By his grace, he brings into his people, even back then, all kinds of people. All kinds of people are welcome in his covenant community, and he welcomes them in. But this here, in this chapter here, it's the renewal of a covenant, okay? The covenant's already been set up ages ago. Exodus, through Moses, God set this covenant up. But here, what's happening is it's being renewed. They're coming back to it. Moses is saying, let's come back to this arrangement, to this agreement between us and God. It happens the same in Joshua chapter 24. And Joshua says, look, let's just come back to this, folks. The famous passage where he says, that as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. So they come back to the covenant, and that is so helpful for us. Let's just take that bare thought of renewing the covenant. Isn't that helpful for all of us to stop and to pause and to think, how am I going to come back to him today? How am I going to renew the relationship with him today. Maybe for you today, it is literally like I've entirely gone away and I need to turn around and entirely come back again. Got it complete. But for many of us, there will be one or two or three areas. What is it for you in your life where you think, oh yeah, it's January. Where do I need to renew the relationship with him? I was challenged just this week, just reading something, and just, yeah, okay, Rich, yeah, two or three things there. Need to sort out, need to change, need to come back to him in these areas of my life. And it is today, isn't it? Did you notice that? Verse 12. You are standing here in order to enter into a covenant with the Lord your God, a covenant the Lord is making with you this day, he says. And then verse 13 again, this day. And you know, again, that word today appears 58 times in this book. Remember, this is Moses' sermon series. He's preaching to us in Deuteronomy, and he's got that urgency of a preacher. He's saying, look, guys, come back today. Come back today. And this is the final sermon of the sermon series, so he's really going for it at this point. He's saying, look, would you come back to the Lord your God today? Let me ask you that through, as Moses asked them, let me ask you, will you come back to him today? What's that area of your life you think, yep, need to come back? Something's up for annual renewal this morning. And it's not a subscription. It's not a form to fill in. It's not an insurance policy. It's you. It's you. It's you. It's you. It's me. We're up for annual renewal today. Are you up for that? What are you doing this afternoon? What are you going to do this afternoon? Would you get on your knees this afternoon? Metaphorically or physically or both, I don't know. But would you get on your knees this afternoon and renew? Just come to him in all honesty, confess your sins, say, oh, Lord, I've got these things wrong, I'm sorry. And come back to his grace. Maybe not on your knees, maybe you go out for a walk this afternoon, you just think about it, review, and renew the relationship, come back to him. That's the first thing. The second thing is contemplate disaster tomorrow. You think, oh, blimey, he's got a baby and he's a bit tired and he's a bit grumpy. And so here we go. Now we've got to get through this middle bit. Buckle up, everyone. Contemplate disaster tomorrow. And I appreciate for some of you, perhaps with tender conscience or prone to feeling a bit anxious, you might think, oh, what is God telling me is going to happen tomorrow? Something awful. But this is where Moses takes us. He says, contemplate disaster tomorrow. He wants them to come back today, and so he says, look, if you don't, look, this is where things could head tomorrow. Where does he go with all of this, Moses? Look where he turns first. Verse 14, he says, I am making this covenant, this oath, not only with you who are standing here today in the presence of the Lord our God, but also with those who are not here today. So you see what he's saying to them is that we're making this covenant arrangement. Yeah, well, you guys, you're right here, right now. But also this is for your tomorrow, and it's also for the tomorrow of those yet to come, the next generation, those who will come along too, the generations to come. And folks, as a church, I said this before, I'll say it again, we must think generationally. We must be thinking long term, and we must be thinking generationally as we look forwards, not just where have we been and where are we now, but where do we need to be for their sake? As an aside, but that's what he does. He says, look, for their tomorrow, for your tomorrow, and then where does he go? What does he warn them about? Straight away, verse 16, he says, you yourselves know how we lived in Egypt and how we passed through the countries on the way here. And then, here we go, verse 17. You saw among them their detestable images and idols. Moses' concern for tomorrow is that they will return to idols, that they will turn to idols. He says, verse 18, make sure there is no man or woman, clan or tribe among you today whose heart turns away from the Lord our God to worship the gods of those nations. Just notice that. He zeroes in on the heart again, and he says, don't be led astray by those idols. How does he describe them? End of verse 18, the root among you that produces such bitter poison, literally poison and wormwood. Idols, false gods are poison and wormwood. They're a pain, they're a problem, they take over, they kind of get in everywhere, and they're poison as well. They're lethal, says Moses. Now, remember how we applied this way back when, a number of weeks ago now, particularly to those two things, didn't we, of comfort and control. And we said, hey, where is it that we're worshipping? We're bowing down before comfort and control. Control's not a bad thing. We're told to subdue the earth. You have to bring that pile of washing under control. You have to bring your diary under control, your work under control. Control's not a bad thing in and of itself, but a good thing becomes a God thing. And we connive and contrive and find ways to feel like I'm in control. I've got this. I'm on top of this. And so we bow down and worship the God of control rather than the God who is in control of all things. That was one, wasn't it? And there was comfort as well. Nothing wrong with comfort. Again, food, fire, film, particularly this time of year. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But a good thing becomes a God thing. And we comfort eat. We comfort drink. We comfort spend. We comfort save. We find comfort through control, perhaps. And the God of all comfort is there. And he would be our comfort. And so there's an application and a challenge. I thought I'd just remind us of that. We found that helpful to go through that process together as a church. How's it going? How's it going with comfort and control, those idols? And then there's this picture of complacency, isn't there? Verse 19, when such a person hears the words of this oath, they invoke a blessing on themselves, thinking, I'll be safe, even though I persist in going my own way. And then they will bring disaster. Disaster, that's it. Contemplate disaster tomorrow. You wander away from the Lord to false gods, to idols. Contemplate disaster tomorrow. You know, part of the disaster here is verse 22, isn't it? Your children who follow you in later generations and foreigners who come from distant lands will see the calamities that have fallen on the land. You know, the nations around them, verse 24, will ask, why has the Lord done this to this land? Why this fierce burning anger? You see the problem? See, what Moses is concerned about is their children, the next generation, and the nations who will look on. You see, they're meant to look at these people and see, as I said the other week, a friend of mine says, doesn't he, a glimpse of something good. And from there to see their great God. But the danger is that the nations look at God's people in a mess as they are like this, and they turn away from the Lord. Deuteronomy is it's outward, it's missional, because God is missional and he's concerned for the nations. And it goes disastrously wrong. Why? Verse 25. It's because this people abandoned the covenant. For them, that meant they were kicked out of the land, and that's their situation back then. But again, this is so helpful for us, isn't it? John Newton, mentioned earlier, he says, doesn't he, about our lives, many dangers, toils and snares. And there are, aren't there? There are many dangers for us as Christians. Many dangers, many toils, many snares, things that could entangle us. And we've got to beware. We've got to stay close to him. And he wants us to come back today. And for the sake of that, he says, contemplate disaster tomorrow if you don't. You get this with kids now and again, don't you, I guess? If you've got kids, you've had kids, you'll know this kind of situation. It kind of rumbles along for a little while, and then after a given point, you have to say no, right? You have to say no, and often at that point you'll say, look, if this continues, then, and he does that here, for the sake of come back today, if this continues, disaster tomorrow, if you don't. And that leads to the third thing. You see the theme. Come back again. Come back again. Today, tomorrow, and onwards. God is so gracious, isn't he? I got the good passage, didn't I? Leslie had the tough one, but I got the good one, right? He's so gracious in that he makes a way for them to come back, to return. Even in verse 29, it's there, chapter 29, verse 29. It's a famous Bible verse. We often mention it. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever. See, God has revealed himself. That's his grace. That's his kindness. He's not left us in the dark. He's spoken to his people clearly, but not just revealed. You see it in the chapter that follows. They're able to return. He pictures this situation where they're going to return. They're going to take it to heart, verse 1, and then they're going to return. They're going to come back to the Lord, their God, and he's going to restore them, verse 3, and he's going to gather them. Wasn't that beautiful? They're banished to like the furthest possible places in the whole world, and God says, and when that happens, I'll bring you back. I'll gather you. He is such a gracious God, and it happened to them back then. They did. They came back to the land and back to his laws and back to the Lord to a degree, and it can happen for us too. You know, you might have wandered very far, whether it's entirely yourself, your whole self, or just in a particular area. And here is the Lord who says, I'll speak to you, I'll call you by name. You can return, and I'll restore you, I'll regather you to me. Like a parent, isn't he, the Lord our God? He's a father. He's like a parent who has only ever loved their child. You know, that parent who would do anything for their child, who would even lay down their own life for their child, that wayward one. And he says to anyone, to all, with open arms, come back to me. Come back to me today. He didn't just say it, does he? He does it. He makes a way back. Imagine the people back then, and I suppose we feel it as well ourselves a little bit, this whole language of curse, right? If they just stuck with God and gone his way and gone into the land and stayed with him, then it's blessings. It's blessings all the way. That's God's default mode. It's grace, it's blessings, it's good stuff. But if they turn, then it's the curses, isn't it? And that person back then just goes, oh, you know what, it would work. It would work. But all the time, every day, I just find that I keep turning back this way. I just keep going back over here. I just keep wandering off. I can't help it. It's like it's inbuilt. It's like it's just a kind of default mode. I just find that I keep turning away, and so I'm constantly facing the curses of God. You know, if only I could just stop doing that. Or maybe if the curse could be taken away somehow, just removed from me, if only. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus Christ, the head of the new covenant, came along and he absorbed the curse of the law and sin on the cross. That's what we're told in Galatians 3, isn't it? The language, it's very much the language of Deuteronomy. In verse 10, we're told, cursed is everyone who does not continue to do everything. Remember Johnny's kids talk, everything written in the book of the law. But then wonderfully, if that's our plight, verse 13, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole. Jesus took the curse on himself. What Adam couldn't do, what Noah couldn't do, what Abraham couldn't do, what Moses couldn't do, what David couldn't do, Jesus could, and he did for you on the cross. And so the curse is taken away. The curse of sin has no hold on me. Whom the Son sets free, oh, he's free indeed. That's for starters. You see it pictured here, the curse is pushed away from them in verse 6. But it's not just that. He makes a way back. He takes the curse away. And then he says, look, I'm going to sort out the problem on the inside. God comes to us and he says, I'm prepared to perform heart surgery on you. Did you notice that? It's there, isn't it? In verse 6, the Lord your God will circumcise your hearts, the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart, with all your soul, and live. You know that problem that they wrestle with constantly. God says, love me with all your heart. And just all the time, the heart wanders, prone to wander, right? And he says, look, I'm going to come and sort your heart out and give you a new heart. And on into the New Testament, what that means is a new life, right? To be born again, to have new life with Jesus. Someone has noticed, I think it's so helpful, we've mentioned this before, often in our culture we think that we have an outside problem and there's an inner solution, and I'll find the solution within me somehow. But as the guy goes on to say, no, the gospel tells us that we have an inner problem. And wonderfully, there is an outside solution. And his name is Jesus. As my old pastor used to say, the heart of the problem, the human problem, is the problem of the human heart. I finally got that rest that I was talking about over the Christmas season. It came unexpectedly, actually, and it came through this film, right? The new Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. Very clever, isn't it? Play on words. And it came a bit early, actually. I thought I'd have to wait till 9 p.m. But the film was on, and the brood, were sort of on me and sort of pinned down, and everyone's settled, and it was all going well. And we managed the whole thing together. It was a miracle, right? And it was great. It was a really good family film, Vengeance Most Foul. It's basically a Mickey take out of Northerners. Like the whole film is taking the mick out of Northern people. So you'd love it. You'd enjoy it. I won't sort of spoiler alert. I don't want to spoil a film. Who's seen it? Go on, hands up. Who's seen? Okay, so I'll try not to spoil the whole thing, but I thought it was a cracker. And in the story, he comes up with this latest gadget. He's always coming up with stuff, isn't it? It's the robotic garden gnome. He looks like a Northerner too, doesn't he? God, he does. Called, I can imagine what he talks about, but called Norbert. That's Norbert, isn't it? And he creates Norbert, and Norbert is good at, he does gardening, right? So he goes to his gardening jobs, and when he's in that mode, that's what he does. He does gardening stuff. But then there's this moment when you see that actually inside of Norbert, well, once you get through the system admin and into the brain center and through the memory center and through the language center and through the garden center, very good, I like that. Once you get through all of that, you get to the core protocol. You get to the core protocol. The default setting within Norbert, and in a split second you see what options you've got, right? There's the core protocol, and then here's all the options, and he just goes, it's just a split second in the film. It's worth going back, pause it at this point. But good. Yeah, be good. He can be good, Norbert, or he can be pleasant, or he can be unassuming, or dull, or boorish, or mildly annoying, bit selfish, grumpy, mean-spirited, really nasty, evil. And it poses the question, doesn't it? Forget the robot. What is your core protocol? What is your core protocol? What's mine? What's the default setting of the human heart? What is it? Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a good while ago now, he's a Russian novelist, a critic of the Soviet Union, communism. He was in the gulags, Stalin's gulags, for a while because he criticized Stalin. He said this, didn't he? The line separating good and evil passes not through states, not through political parties and different social classes and all of that. No, the line separating good and evil passes right through every human heart. Friends, that is our core protocol. It's a messy mix. But there's evil in there. And don't we know it? In our hearts, in our lives. You try and do it so well, get it so right, and not all goes wrong. This is The Goldfinch. It was a 2013 novel, critically acclaimed novel, turned it into a film as well. I confess I've not actually read the novel, but my attention was drawn to this. Towards the end of the novel, the main character is just reflecting on all of these things and says this. From William Blake to Lady Gaga, from Rousseau and on. It's curiously uniform message, accepted from high to low. When in doubt, what to do? How do we know what's right for us? Every shrink, every career counsellor, every Disney princess knows the answer. Be yourself, follow your heart. That's our culture, isn't it? Be yourself, follow your heart. And then he says this, it's rare for people to be so honest, isn't it? He says, only here's what I really, really want someone to explain to me. What if one happens to be possessed of a heart that can't be trusted? What if one happens to be possessed of a heart that can't be trusted? What if the heart, for its own reasons, leads one willfully away from health, responsibility, strong social connections, all the blandly held common virtues, and instead straight towards a beautiful flare of ruin, disaster? If your deepest self is singing and coaxing you straight toward the bonfire, is it better to turn away? How honest is that? That so often our hearts, our core protocol, our deepest self takes us away from all that is good and right and healthy and from the God who made us. And you know, God in Jesus Christ came into this world to take away the curse of sin and to deal with the problem within. No, to deal with your problem within. My problem within. Do we not wrestle most with our hearts, with what goes on inside of us every day? And he came to sort that out for us and to give us all the resources we need to rekindle, to return, to restore, to renew the relationship with him. And he stands today, the God of the universe, with open arms, and he says to you, wherever you are sat this morning, whether you're here right now, you're online, wherever you are sat, wherever you've been, whatever you've got up to, my son, my daughter, my child, come back to me today. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we are so prone to wander. Father, our hearts lead us astray. Lead us to good, but they lead us to evil. And Father, we come before you as those who have broken the covenant, those who have broken the relationship, those who have strayed and wandered, those who so desperately need to come back to you. Father, would you have mercy on us? Would you be gracious to us? Would you help us to return? Help us to be restored, and help us today, before we go to sleep tonight, to come back to you. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.